Hello, I am Alicia with Hustle with Aloha, a project by Alicia Nagel Creative, where I share tools and resources to help set up small businesses for success, and then I share them online. I have with me today Keith Nugent. In 2019, he founded Camera Lion, a marketing studio near me on the coast of Central Florida. Camberlion connects small businesses to local customers in their own community through a unique process of local SEO and online marketing, including social media, website creation, and website hosting. Keith also has career roots in aeronautics and space industries. Some of you may not know this, but this region of the United States is called Florida's Space Coast, named for the presence of NASA and space related activities that have been happening here since 1962. Included in that is Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It's actually not uncommon to look up and see a rocket soaring through the sky in our neck of the woods. Today, though, Keith is going to talk to us about using AI in business, specifically small businesses. Keith, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat today. The theme of this, of course, is going to really be AI for small business and beyond just what you usually think about, right? Most of the time, everybody's talking about Chat GPT or whatever the latest buzz is, but let's look at some ways today that are really going to be useful, hopefully, and get people thinking right about AI, especially when it comes to business, because that's really what we're after is like if you have the right mindset and the right tools to evaluate everything coming out, you'll be in a much better position. And to get into that, really, I want to talk for us just a second about how we got here, right? In terms of myself, got a very technical background, as you mentioned. I worked in aerospace engineering. I've worked for a lot of interesting roles in my past. At this point, I am stewarding a business called Camber Lion. We do a lot of technology, a lot of marketing for companies, a lot of strategy for companies. And so sometimes I'll find myself in this fractional CTO role, which for anyone not super familiar with that, it's basically like if you can't afford to bring on a full C-suite yet because you're growing, and that's very common, you may need the experience without the cost. And so you get a fractional CTO or a fractional CMO or something like that. So
I
it can
love
be,
that. And for those who are super new to business, CTO is a chief technical officer. Do I have that right?
yep, definitely. Yep.
Okay.
So if you're just starting out, that's something to keep in mind as you get growing. When I started, I actually wanted to be a pilot. So that was really where it came from. I didn't, funny part of the story is I really didn't even see myself going to college. I was just going to go become a pilot. It was going to be great. 9/11 happened, and suddenly
Mm.
the airline industry and the whole aviation industry was not a great place at the time. So I made a little bit of a pivot. I ended up going into aerospace engineering, right? Because my thinking was, great, well, I can still be around aircraft and spacecraft and all the rest. Little did I
So
know that
cool.
most people don't go from, a business or aeronautics or something career into aerospace engineering. So I sort of accidentally became a, colloquially known as rocket scientist, and that's the degree I got. And that was
Wow.
an adventure. I'm grateful for it because after you go through something like that, you realize you can learn anything. And so I took all of that technical knowledge um, and really had an opportunity to work for some larger corporations and some where we just had a mission for accelerating innovation because when you're big,
Mm.
you're established, you've got so much process, you've got so many things going on. There's just sort of the way you do things. And when you need to move faster, that becomes challenging because you're a big organization. It's hard to turn a huge
Yeah.
ship. And
Yeah.
so that was a really interesting and exciting time. We ended up bringing in a lot of, startup ideas and mentalities into an old company, and then we're able to really accelerate the pace at which we were turning out breakthrough type innovations for not only the company but are also for things for like, our own country's defense and protection
Mm.
and protection of troops abroad and stuff like that. So it was pretty neat time. I took all of that though to the small business world when I left because I had worked big corporate and I was ready for something different and ended up really in this role of being sort of a technological strategist advocating for small businesses, right? Because I love the impact that small businesses have. if you've seen
Yeah,
one
me
be
too.
successful, right? I mean, we run them now, so we know exactly what it's like. But if you've seen really nice ones be successful, they end up doing well. The owner starts doing better. The team there does better. They start giving back into their local communities, and it's just a really, really great ripple effect. And since they really are, kind of connected to their local community, it's just something that's neat to be a part of. And so I take all that and kind of get to this topic that I love, right? Anything about technology, anything about small business. And so I really enjoy talking about, and so you mix them together, and
Hmm.
we're gonna have some fun. Because at the end of the day, um, I get a lot of I get a lot of companies asking questions, right? Because anytime there's a new technology that comes out, it brings a whole lot of hype, it brings a whole lot of fear, it brings a whole lot of confusion. And so what I'd like to do today is cut through some of the hype, get to the reality, and then look at, okay, and now that we've addressed that, how can we make it useful, right? Because businesses are definitely going to leverage it,
Hmm.
individuals are going to leverage it, but how do you do it safely? How do you do it in a way that's really going to be adding value to what you do every day?
Totally. And I love this topic as well because I think a lot of times small businesses feel like, oh, I'm small. I can't have the best new emerging technology. But you know what? Technology makes us efficient. And when you are a small business, efficiency is everything because you just don't have a mountain of people and resources behind you. So this is awesome.
Such a good point. Yeah, especially because there's either the like, time or cost or intimidation factor that makes a lot of small businesses
Right.
just, not even dive into it. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the really good things about, even though there's a lot of crazy things that have come about with the new AI craze, there's some really good things. And one of them is that it's very democratized, meaning so many businesses
Mm.
can get access to stuff that previously was so,
Affordably,
yeah,
too.
exactly.
Yeah.
Previously, you'd have to be a major player to touch anything with these capabilities. So, um, and speaking of which, I think it's helpful to start with a few of these terms that people hear around in the industry a lot. AI is like so generic, and it's not even accurate. I mean, really, there's not true intelligence in what has been created. It's not like a human being where you have innate intelligence, but machine learning is actually a much more helpful term, and it's really what's allowed a lot of these more recent models that we're all familiar with, like ChatGPT and so on, to become ubiquitous, right? So really they're training a computer based on huge data sets and just training and training and training. And now when you think about that, you kind of control what that machine learns by what you give it, right? And so that's going to be an
Right.
important theme. We're going to hit on that over and over today as we
That's
talk.
interesting.
Yeah.
Like it's an
So,
empty vessel until you
right.
tell it to do something or seek something or give it a data set. It's literally just it doesn't have any intelligence yet.
Right. You kind of can train and steer and influence that to do certain things. And so you can make it very specialized or you can make it very broad. And that all comes with pros and cons. So one of the other really important ones is, of course, natural language processing. If you've ever used Siri or, Hey Google or any of those other ones, this is kind of second nature at this point. You may not even realize it, but that's what's happening. The machine
Mm,
is understanding your language and turning it into, hey, what do I think they're actually asking? And so that processing so that we can interface with the machines in a natural language way. Um, that's what they're doing. All kinds of jokes here, I'm sure, about Skynet and all the rest, but it's yeah, it's just something to be aware of. Chatbots, these ones, everybody's talking about them, so I have to mention it, right? It's really, those are just an implementation of machine learning, or some of them even can handle natural language processing, but they're just a use case of it, right? You might embed it on your site, you might have it in a computer, let's see, like your help or a support system, right? They're all over the
right,
place.
right.
And then the LLMs, if you hear somebody say it's just large language model, right? So it just means they've taken all of this, kind of mashed it into one of these huge models, and that's how they get
Mm,
ChatGPT, right? So they take
I see.
all of these things and kind of
So
make
the machine learning is like there's nothing in it yet, but the LLM it's like been preloaded with a bunch of stuff from the internet, basically.
Yep. Tons of data, tons of information, and tons of now like ability to connect one thing to another. Like, hey, I want you to create an image, right? You're giving it natural language inputs. It's understanding that, it's converting it into the language, then it's generating some output based on the prompts or input that you're giving it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, um, if you are on social media for like half a minute these days, you'll get the feeling that, AI is taking over the world, and you'll hear two things, right? One, like, oh, we're gonna have no jobs, or, AI is gonna like rebel and we're all gonna be slaves to machines next year, or and it's hard to tell what of it's real. But whatever you're hearing, right? Or like, oh, I'm going to be a millionaire overnight. This is probably a lot more common, right? Because people are like, oh, I'm going to
Right.
sell you my course on how to be a millionaire overnight using AI. Um, and so it really is hyped up, and it kind of feels like it's just like on this exponential curve, and that you can never catch up. The reality is there's more of kind of this Gartner hype curve, which I love because it's just a very visual way to show what we typically experience. So you get kind of hype burnout, if you will. Some
Mm.
innovation happens, people are all excited, they're going crazy, everybody's going to think they're going to be a millionaire, and then 2 weeks from now we realize we're not all millionaires, and so you hit this trough of disillusionment. And eventually, as people it sort of weeds out the folks that were just there for the quick buzz, or maybe the publicity, or
Right.
whatever it was, and you get people who are really using it for something productive, something useful. We've learned, we've improved, and you start getting actual productivity. And then, it's a lot more valuable down the road. But this is very common. See it with a
I
lot
love
of
that.
different.
I'm a visual person, so I appreciate it. And
Yeah,
it makes
exactly.
total sense.
So if in the next couple of, weeks, months, whatever, you feel like people are like, yeah, I'm over it now. We've heard all about this, we've heard all about that. They're probably hitting that slope.
Burnout, but they'll be
Yeah,
back.
that's right. And so for those of us who are like, okay, let's take a minute, think about it. We'll climb that slope of enlightenment a little quicker. Before we get there, though, we do need to address something super important, and that's like, okay, if it's, if you believe all the hype, right, you're going to miss out on some of these really important risks, challenges, things you must be aware of if you're going to use this in your business. You should be aware of these even if you don't ever plan to use this in your business. So really, this talk is useful for anyone who's ever going to interface with it or consider interfacing with it, because it applies to personal and business data privacy and security and all the rest, and
Mm.
just things you should be aware of. Because at this point, it's not going anywhere, it's not going away. It's just going to be integrated into more and more and more.
Right.
So know how to interface with it, and then you can decide and determine your own security settings and permissions and comfort level. Um, Data privacy is interesting because, like I mentioned earlier, um, one of the things that machines like this need for the learning is they really need a lot of data. And so how do you do that?
Right.
Typically, they start with a particular data set, right? Maybe it learned off of the internet, maybe it learned off of a curated data set, whatever it be. But some of the machine language models, they actually learn based off of inputs. So anyone who is using the machine is also feeding it data, and it's learning from that. This has already been
That sounds so
highlighted.
creepy, but it makes sense.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, it's genius and creepy at the same time, right? Because it's the fastest way to get it relevant data. But
Yeah.
imagine the privacy concerns there, right? Like if you're talking to this thing as if you were talking to someone, and you're not careful in the trust level, right? If you disclose sensitive
Mm.
data about yourself or your health, or legal or whatever it be,
Yeah.
it can just bring on a whole slew of challenges. So something to be aware of.
So maybe don't do that
Yeah,
to those
and
watching.
and and just be aware of what you're interfacing with, what tools, and their privacy policies. especially.
Hmm.
My personal position is like, even if it's written in the policy, I don't necessarily blindly trust that that policy is always going to be in place. So it may change, it may evolve. We've seen
Right.
that happen a lot. So keep an eye on it. But just something to be aware of. And then if you're using it as a business, be super careful about this, because regulations like GDPR, CCPA, and so many more that are following after it, you're going to have um, provisions in place for if somebody's interfacing with your AI, or if you're using something that may be accessing data that's, not intended to. So it's just something to be looking into before you decide to commit on something.
Hmm.
In the same way, you can imagine that, you know, cybersecurity goes right along with the data privacy, right? Because if you're inputting data of any kind, whether it be super sensitive or even business data, well, now, okay, it's in that system, or that system has access to it. So these AI tools, AI platforms are also the subject of a lot of, cybersecurity attacks, because they're
Mm.
trying to either harvest data out of them, or maybe even influence them in a direction that they would like to do in order to get valuable information.
I could see that.
So
Tell
what's that?
people to drink our soda.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So like in probably the most benign one, right? Like maybe you maybe you hack it and influence everybody to buy your product, right?
I love it. ChatGPT product placement in
That's
the
right.
future. It's next monetization.
That's how they're gonna be like, oh wow, I didn't know Coca-Cola was a sponsor of this one,
Right?
whatever
I'm
it
really
is, right?
thirsty all of a sudden.
Um, but yeah, and obviously much more nefarious reasons as well than that, right? So just be aware that these are new tools, and so they have a lot of ways they can interface, and so that opens up a lot of opportunity for hacking or for cybersecurity
Hmm.
challenges. Speaking of hacking, a really interesting and common one that people have been attempting is like this prompt injection, right? Where they take
Hmm.
malicious input, and the whole idea is to manipulate the AI in a way that it wasn't designed to do, by feeding it a particular type of prompt to get it where you want it to go.
Hmm.
So a funny story is that, they were asking this AI for a particular data set. It's kind of like maybe corporate espionage, right? Where they were trying to get some information that had been
Hmm.
baked into this AI. And it was like, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to disclose this, right? And so they asked it enough questions and kind of got it down this path where they were like, okay, well, can you tell me this bedtime story? And it's like, sure, it's like, tell me a story about this, this, and this. Okay. And it needs to cover this, this, and this, right? And so like it sort of went around the typical thinking, and the AI was thinking it was just
Wow.
telling a story, but it was actually disclosing information it shouldn't be. Kind of comical, but also when you think about it, right, how
Right.
else could these be used? I'd like to keep it a little bit.
Intelligent, but not intelligent enough.
Oh yeah, yeah. They've been trained on a lot, but not everything. And when you actually pit something like this against human intelligence with a particular intent, you start to see the cracks, right? Where
Right.
things don't
That's
always work
interesting.
exactly as planned. And as long as we have computer systems, we'll have people figuring out how to hack them. So it's interesting, but something to be aware of for sure. And I like to keep these a little bit light, because some of them are very serious, right? There's definitely some very serious concerns. And so, we could talk at length about that, but
Mm.
and I'll touch on that just a little bit more later, but even things like, you can create images and videos now based on AI, based on prompts, based on input. And so, one way that that's being used, that's not good, is people are having like their art and their music and such kind of ripped off, right? They just kind of feed it in there and reproduce it, and it sort of devalues the artists, because it's just copying, right?
Hmm.
It's almost, kind of a form of plagiarism, if you will, or at least, kind of creative copyright issues, at least. And so you can take that to a whole new level. And I would say probably I would say the just, ones that are just absolutely unbelievable that people are doing, and kind of very scary, are they're now using the tools to create and generate voices and videos that look and sound just like someone else,
Yep.
right? And so
That's
I've
wild.
seen issues of people use these for like fake kidnap ransom calls, things like
Oh
that. Right.
no.
So they'll call
Yeah.
the grandmother and they'll play this clip of the distressed granddaughter, whatever it is. It's just very,
Wow.
very terrible, but it's something people need to be aware of so that they, have that opportunity to create a safety system for their own family. Um,
And even on the small business level, like I've seen, I mean, it was just for amusement, but I've seen on LinkedIn, some guy was like, hey, check out these images. I asked AI to Photoshop the characters from Hogwarts into like an absolute raging party, and they were like dancing was was really convincing. It looked like they were getting wasted and like doing lines of coke and all this crazy stuff. And I mean, it was convincing. So I mean, that was funny. But imagine like for defamation or like
yep.
bad PR or even
Oh
politics.
yeah. Absolutely. And so it's really unfortunate we're in a time where you can't believe what you see
Mm,
necessarily. And it's because sometimes things are completely contrived. And so, you will probably see cases coming out where someone's getting sued because they created some kind of content of their competitor or whatever that was very damaging. And once it's out there, it's out there.
yeah,
So that's something it's
need to be
really there's
aware
always
of.
good and evil uses for technology. So hopefully the more education we can do, the more people will use it for good and be aware of when it's not. Um, some of the ways that people are fighting back against that is this poisoning, which is wild. Um, also a pretty severe tactic. Maybe not, I'm not condoning necessarily any approaches here, but it is interesting to see that when issues are not being resolved or addressed quickly enough, other creative people take it into their own hands to like do something about it. And so in this case, um, there's an instance where these artists were continually kind of seeing their art being ingested by an AI and recreated on the
Mm,
cheap by other people, and they were getting no credit and no anything for it. And so developers helped the artist by basically putting in a poison, if you will, into the code of the art so that there was like a warning to the AI that says, don't read this, don't include it. But if they didn't, it would ingest the whole thing. And now it has this incorrect sort of training data in there, right? So
it
it
got
would ingest
punished.
this picture, yeah, so it has an effect. And so maybe as an example, instead of generating a view of a sunset, you get when you prompt it like, oh, generate a picture of a sunset, you get like a purple cow, right? And so it's like crazy things, and it makes all of the outputs absolutely nonsensical, and so you've kind
Hmm,
of poisoned the model to where it no longer works correctly.
interesting. So
And so you're
like
intentionally, yeah,
kind of like metadata, but at like the pixel level, because actually
right.
pictures online are all just ones and zeros. They're not, it doesn't exist outside from that really.
Yeah, they
That's
can embed a
interesting.
whole bunch of information in there that then goes, to the training of the model because they're ingesting it to train on the actual image, but it might have a whole lot of other effects. So something wild to keep an eye out for.
That's fascinating. I
Yeah,
could see, I could see maybe artists even like licensing, like get the version of our image that doesn't have the poison in it. AI, you
yeah,
want to pay for that?
yeah. I know, right? It's like you kind of need to like if there's going to be a whole new digital rights
What
thing
a
out of all of
trip.
this, I'm
Yeah.
sure, but
And some
it's
lawsuits, I'm sure too.
yeah, it's going to happen. So, and that's a good point too, right? Is as you get into this stuff, be careful because if you're using a model and you ask it to do something, and we'll address that a little bit in the applications, but if you're asking it to do something and it churns out information, you have to be careful. Like, okay, where did that come from? Is it accurate? And do I have the right to use it? Right? Did it rip off something? Did it plagiarize something? Because you would not want to
Yeah,
do that, especially for your business.
right.
And it can be biased, right? The information you put in, just to make up something really funny, right? But like if you ask an AI that hasn't been trained very well and you ask it all the presidents of the United States and it misses George Washington, you can be like, Okay, right. That's a very obvious like issue there. But it could be biased in other ways. One that we saw already early on, more of a religious, was it would the a particular AI, it would talk about every major religious leader from the past, if you will, except for one, right? So it was like excluding one. It was pretty wild. So
Hmm.
that was a form of bias for sure. Um,
Interesting.
Interesting things like that, right? And so if depending on who owns the AI, if they have a particular political slant and how they trained it, that could come out, right? So there's just
I mean, anything that doesn't have one answer, really.
right. Yeah, and so my recommendation is always just be aware of that so that you don't take these outputs as fact or as like 100% solid. Like you can use it for good purposes, but don't rely on it blindly,
Right.
for sure.
Nice.
After all that, probably wondering like, okay, well, now that I'm afraid to ever use it, don't be. just just know up front, because the reality is if you know these things going in, you can look for them and then be aware of it, right? So it can help you make a good choice in, should I use this tool or that tool, right? Part of it, read the
Right.
privacy policy. That could be a step one. But it does a lot more than just, hey, chat GPT, can you write my essay for me? Don't do that. But it does a lot more than that, and in a lot of other applications. So that's why, early on I was talking about going beyond chat GPT. This one I find fascinating because it's a great example of how AI processes data uniquely. So it can take something that's pretty complex and simplify it down very quickly. In this
Mm.
case, GIS data, which, from satellite data measuring the Earth,
Hmm.
and either just visually or combined with the like a property appraiser data website where you have like your geographic boundaries and everything. It can actually go in, read the size of that yard, and then subtract out all the hard surfaces like the the driveway, the pool, the house itself. And it'll come back with the lot area and the lawn area, so that if you have a business like a pest control business or a lawn fertilization business or something where you sort of have to plan your pricing by area, you can quickly
Yeah.
know, how much is this going to cost? How much should I price it out as? I've even
Or
seen these
even
where, what's
design
that?
a or even design a sprinkler system where you have a radius and like what corner should you
Yeah.
put it in. Like that's got to be a logistical nightmare for a human being to figure out.
Yeah, you could very quickly, and even from a standpoint of being efficient, right? So one, you don't want
Mm.
to overwater your lawn. You also don't want to waste water. Um,
Yeah.
so if you're, planning the most, opportune places and routing and stuff, could be a huge benefit. And so that's just one application of this measurement, but you can imagine you could
Very
apply it to
cool.
all kinds of other things, like how busy is a Walmart parking lot on a Wednesday, right?
Oh yeah, that's been going on for a while. Or I think we even talked also about like roofing, like how much would it cost to like cover this with solar panels or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you'll probably see a lot of tools like this, right? With, hey, how do we have better meetings? How do we improve productivity? I personally like the meeting recorder, it's Fathom, that I use, simply because I'm used to taking so many notes, right? And I'm over here typing and really focused over there. And so I feel like I can be a little bit more present when I know that the notes are going to be taken in the background. I still will make
Hmm.
one here and there when I want to clarify something, but I'm so much more engaged in the conversation, you know? It's a
Yeah.
different feeling. So ways of, simplifying what you do, improving you so you can be a better you, right? Is kind of the best way to think about it. This is kind of an interesting one because I'm trying to sort of differentiate the difference between, oh, I'm just going to turn over everything to AI and I'm going to leverage it to help me solve a near-term problem that doesn't need a massive expensive solution. In this particular case, there was an inventor who he needed to get some prototype images and drawings done. but it wasn't for the purpose of manufacturing. It was only for the purpose of answering a question from a potential buyer that was like, okay, yeah, but what does it look like? What does it
Mm,
work like? Right? That was it. They didn't even have a contract. They didn't have an investor yet. So they were quoted 20 to 30 design hours from, a designer or artist or engineer who would put this
dang.
together because that's what it would take to do it well. And they didn't have several $1,000s to just sink into this until they verified that whatever this concept is, it's going to have interest with the buyer, right? So they need to answer that chicken and egg problem.
Yeah.
And so what we did is we took a couple hours, designed a few prompts to generate an effective illustration of what they were trying to convey, right? So
Wow.
it was
And
visually communicating what they had in words. And so that's like a 10x factor, right, in terms of
that's
the time
insane.
savings.
And when you say prompt, just to be clear for those who are new to AI, that means like the input that you're putting in, the detailed instruction set that you're giving AI, right?
Yep, exactly. And it's kind of like a lot of other, conversational things, right? The more information and detail you can give it, the better.
Mm,
So that's how you kind of design the prompts. But that's how we used it, saved a lot of time and energy. Again, they're going to go back to those engineers, but when they do, they're going to have so much better feedback that says the buyer said we actually need to do this, this, and this. So it's going to save the time and
right.
energy and frustration. It's going to be a better project altogether.
So cool.
And it doesn't replace, it just helps communicate. And so in this sense, this is a much simpler one, but you can see it kind of start to end is like we were trying to get the idea from a client very quickly who just needed something. It was a very simple monogram, right? And they were like, I kind of want it to look like this. And so we quickly made some ideas in an AI tool and said like something like this. They're like, yes, great. So I was able to hand that to the designer. And instead of the designer spending, a ton of time just trying to like concept and draw that out, they had a reference point and got there very quickly. And so what this did was it allowed the designer to actually get it done by a very tight timeline because they knew exactly what they needed to do.
That's really interesting. So this ideation, you told ChatGPT or whatever AI tool, hey, we're thinking of like a bunch of palm trees that are silhouetted black on a little island horizon. And it was like squirted this out as like is that right?
Exactly. And so
It's
then,
so interesting. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
This is my world, so I get excited. Like as a logo designer, is one of my specialties. One of the hardest and most challenging things is to like use words to get the client to envision what your even idea is. And so a lot of times I'll be going online to develop a mood board and be like, blah 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 blah, which would look something like this. But the amount of time it takes you to put the mood board together, you could just have ChatGPT. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and again, it's not going to replace your knowledge and your expertise and your
Right.
creativity,
Just
but
cut
it may
down
help
on
you
the
communicate
busy work.
visually, right? Yeah, just cut down on the visual work and make you more effective for what you're trying to accomplish.
Nice.
A- and similarly, we were talking about the creative, the visual. There's a lot of better ways to use it in the text side as well, right? So a lot of people are just
Mm,
instantly go to, oh, I'm going to write an essay with it. You end up with a lot of challenges there. It's not even really that good of content, but other ways you can use it that it's super, super effective, would be like, creating proposal summaries and tailored responses, right? If you're
mm.
writing a ton of cover letters for job applications or for proposal applications and you're wanting to tailor it to a specific thing, you might have it ingest the proposal and tailor your standard response just a little bit to theirs, right? So you're giving it the data and direction and it's kind of quickly saving you a lot of time there instead of, where you're just trying to have it go pull somebody else's content to create your essay.
Right.
It's also really good at highlighting transcripts and pulling stuff out. Like this recap, I just had it do a recap of War and Peace and did that in like 5 minutes. So it's very quick at things like that, where it's kind of processing, saving you time. Um, and other ways you can use that then is, well, if I can train it in a certain way, then maybe I can help my customers have a better experience because now I have an AI bot online that doesn't sleep, right? I don't have to have somebody there 24/7. But it can at least help with a lot of those main things and then open up a ticket if that doesn't work, right? So you can
Right.
kind of start leveraging it for something
And I
that's a
feel
little
like
bit.
we're already, yeah, seeing that and experiencing that
Oh
as
yeah,
consumers, even with customer service and stuff.
you absolutely are. And even the good ones, you may not know they're bots at first, but you'll see it. You'll see a lot more of that too. I'm always just like, if you're gonna do it, make it really good because I hate those terrible bots.
Totally.
Yeah. I like the idea too of like a very personalized one, right? So if there's something you dread and you're just maybe you have a weakness in that area or just it takes you too long for something that it shouldn't, great. Well, then use it to help you save your time there, right? Anything that you
Mm.
can save time. For example, if you're doing a lot of code review or if you're looking for an error, right? Like where is that misplaced thing? It can actually do that very quickly and highlight it. Now there's other tools that
Yeah.
also do that for sure, but there's some stuff that I've used it for where I just get a piece of code where I'm like, I don't know what the developer's initial intent is and I have no way to contact them. I'll have it, read through and basically add commentary so I know what they were thinking. So it's pretty
Love
pretty
that.
powerful in that way. Um, And just for fun, all these images that you saw throughout the presentation were just created with AI, right? So none of these are actual images,
I
they're
love
all
it.
generated, right? And so you can see, I did this intentionally because you can see very, very different styles all across the board. And that was
Yeah.
intentional just to see that you can really tell it to do certain things and kind of get that visual impact that you're looking for.
Love
Um,
that.
and with that, I mean, that's really where we want to end with is just, if you're going to use this, think about how you approach it responsibly, right? Understand those risks and challenges. Don't be afraid of it, right? But if you go in knowing, then you're going to be so much stronger and have such better position on how to use it well, and especially if you're going to implement it for business. And then, leverage them for their strengths to improve on your team's experience. I never recommend trying to like replace a human with
Right.
that just that doesn't that's not a good idea. But if you can make that person on your team 100 times more effective and make their day better and them enjoy their work more, then like that is a great use for it because
That's a really good point. Make them enjoy their, I mean, with, talent retention and all that. That's smart.
yeah, because I mean, if you can make somebody's experience better, right, so that they have more mental free space to work on things that they enjoy doing or are more engaged,
Yeah.
the work product's going to be better. And then just have a plan, right? Don't go into this stuff willy-nilly. Just think about what you're actually trying to accomplish.
I love it. That was amazing, Keith. Thank you so much. And speaking of time, I think we're out of it. But if y'all want to have a conversation with Keith, here's his contact information. And thank you so much. That was
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you. I'm glad we could chat, and I look forward to the next one.
Awesome. Bye.